My brother Caleb is the most financially responsible person I have ever known. He tracks receipts. He reads contracts before he signs them. He has never in his life walked away from money that was owed to him. So when he refused his share of our mother's inheritance, I didn't cry or argue or assume it was grief. I sat across the table from him and said, "What do you know?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I was wondering when you were going to ask that." He didn't answer the question. He just stood up, put on his jacket, and said, "Look at the will documents again. All of them, not just the numbers." Then he left. I need to back up. Our mother died 6 weeks ago. 69 years old, 2 years of decline. The kind of death that is sad and expected, and still somehow manages to arrive as a surprise. She left behind a house, a modest investment portfolio, and an estate that our Uncle Richard had been managing on her behalf for 15 years. Richard was her younger brother, charming, capable, always with an answer ready before you finished the question. He had stepped in after our father left when we were kids, and had never fully stepped back out. He managed the accounts, handled the paperwork, sat beside our mother at every meeting with every financial professional she ever consulted. She trusted him completely, and said so often enough that it stopped being a statement and became a kind of wallpaper. The will split everything 3 ways. Maya, Caleb, Richard, 1/3 each. Caleb refused his share the morning after the reading. No explanation. Just a single sentence to the lawyer saying he was declining and the amount should be redistributed according to the remaining beneficiaries' equal shares, which meant Richard's portion just got significantly larger. I went home that night and pulled out the will documents. All of them. The way Caleb had said it, not just the numbers, had been specific enough that I knew I was looking for something that wasn't financial. I went through every page. On the last page of the supporting documents, tucked behind the asset inventory, was a photograph. Old, printed on the kind of paper that dates it at least 15 years back. My mother and a woman I recognized but hadn't thought about in years. Margaret Osei, her oldest friend. The woman who had stopped coming around 7 years ago after what my mother had described only as a disagreement that got out of hand. On the back of the photograph, in my mother's handwriting, was one word. Sorry. I turned it over and looked at Margaret's face in the photograph. Then I looked up her number and called her before I talked myself out of it. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her who I was. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "I have been waiting 7 years for someone from your family to call me." I had almost given up. I drove to Margaret's house the next morning. She lived 40 minutes away in a house full of plants and framed photographs and the specific, organized warmth of a woman who has built a very intentional life. She made tea without asking if I wanted any, and sat across from me and said, "How much do you already know?" I told her about Caleb refusing the inheritance, about the photograph, about the name on the back. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Your mother put that there." I didn't know she had done it, but I am not surprised. She could never say the hard things out loud. She always found another way. Then, Margaret told me everything. 7 years ago, she had been visiting my mother for a regular Tuesday lunch, the kind they had shared for decades, and she had arrived early. My mother wasn't downstairs yet. Richard was in the study with the door mostly closed, going through paperwork. Margaret had not announced herself. She had stood in the hallway, and she had seen enough of what was on the desk to understand that the documents Richard was reviewing were not standard account management. She had recognized transfer authorizations, amounts that seemed large for routine maintenance. Destination accounts she didn't recognize. She had waited until Richard left, and then she had gone into the study and looked more carefully. She had photographed what she found on the desk with her phone. Then she had sat through lunch and said nothing, and gone home and spent a week trying to understand what she had seen. Then, she had come back and told my mother. My mother had listened to everything, had looked at the photographs Margaret had taken, had sat quietly for a long time. Then she had said, "Richard would never do this to me. You have misunderstood what you saw. He manages complex accounts and things look different when you don't have the full context." Margaret said she had pushed back, gently, then less gently. My mother had become upset, had said Margaret had always been suspicious of Richard and was letting old feelings color her judgment. The lunch had ended badly. Margaret had driven home and waited for my mother to call and say she had looked into it. My mother never called. 6 weeks later, Richard called Margaret instead. He said my mother was very hurt and needed space, and he was asking on her behalf that Margaret respect that. Margaret had sent 2 letters over the following year. Neither was answered. Eventually, she stopped. I asked her if she still had the photographs she had taken. She looked at me steadily. She said, "I have kept everything. I always believed someone would come eventually. I just didn't know it would take 7 years." I drove home with a folder of Margaret's documentation on my passenger seat, and I called Caleb before I was out of Margaret's neighborhood. He picked up immediately, like he had been waiting. I said, "Margaret Osei, He said, "You found the photograph." I said, "You knew about her." He said, "I knew Mom had pushed her out. I didn't know why until later." Then, he told me his side of it. 5 years ago, Caleb had been helping our mother with some household paperwork and had found a statement that didn't make sense. An account he didn't recognize in a routing structure that seemed designed to be hard to trace. He had pulled on that thread quietly for 3 months before he had enough to be certain. Then, he had gone to Richard. Richard had not denied it immediately. He had done something more effective, he had explained it. Reframed it. Told Caleb that the transfers were a tax strategy, that the accounts were structured for protection, that our mother had approved everything and understood the full picture. Caleb had pushed back. Richard had shifted his approach. He had said that if Caleb pursued this, it would destroy our mother, who was already beginning to decline, that the stress of a family legal battle would accelerate everything, that he would stop, restructure, make it right quietly without putting their mother through a public unraveling of her own estate. Caleb had made the worst decision of his life. He had believed him. He said, "I checked every 6 months. The transfers slowed down. I thought he had actually stopped. I didn't know until after she died, and I saw the final accounting that he had just gotten more careful." I said, "How much, Caleb?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Over 15 years. Best I can calculate. Somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000. I sat in my car in my own driveway and looked at my steering wheel. Then I said, "Is that why you refused your share?" He said, "I wasn't going to take money from an estate he had spent 15 years robbing and pretend everything was clean. I couldn't do it. I thought if I refused, maybe you would ask why. I didn't know how to just tell you. I didn't know how to say I had known for 5 years and said nothing. I said, you should have told me." He said, "I know." I said, "I'm not angry at you. I'm going to need you to help me fix it." He said, "I know that too." I called a lawyer that afternoon. Not the family lawyer who had handled the will, a different one. Someone with no existing relationship to anyone in this story. I laid out everything. Margaret's photographs, Caleb's calculations, the transfer records, the timeline. She listened without interrupting, and at the end she said, "This is a strong case. When do you want to move?" I said, "I want to speak to Richard first." She advised against it. I did it anyway. I called Richard and told him I needed to see him about the estate. He said, of course, whatever I needed, he wanted to make sure the transition was as smooth as possible for the family. He said family the way people say it when they mean compliance. He came to my house 2 days later. He looked the same as he always had. Assured, ready, the man with the answer before the question was finished. I put Margaret's folder on the table. He looked at it. He said, "Margaret Osei. I should have known she would resurface. Your mother's oldest friend spent years trying to undermine their relationship out of jealousy, and I put Caleb's calculations next to the folder." He stopped. I put the transfer records on top. 15 years of them. Account numbers, amounts, dates, he said. These need context. Estate management is complex, and without understanding the full strategic picture, these numbers look different than they actually. I put my phone on the table and pressed record visibly so he could see me do it. Then I said, "Richard, I first have a lawyer. 15 years of transfer records, photographs taken inside this house 7 years ago, and my brother's testimony about the conversation you had 5 years ago where you asked him to stay quiet. I am giving you the same choice you gave Caleb, except I am not Caleb. So you have about 30 seconds to decide whether you want to talk to me or talk to a courtroom." The assurance left his face like a light switching off. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How much do you want back?" I said, "All of it." He said that wasn't possible. I said, "Then we're done talking and my lawyer will be in touch tomorrow morning." He said, "Wait." I waited. What followed was 40 minutes of the most uncomfortable conversation I have ever sat through. Not because he became emotional, he didn't, but because watching a man calculate and recalculate in real time, looking for the exit that isn't there, has a specific ugliness to it that stays with you. In the end, he agreed to a full accounting and a repayment structure that my lawyer formalized within the week. Whether we recover everything, I don't know yet. The legal process is slow, and Richard has his own lawyer now, and some of it may be genuinely unrecoverable. But enough is moving in the right direction that the outcome is no longer in question. Only who got there first. Caleb came over the week after the agreement was signed. We sat in the kitchen and didn't talk about Richard or money or any of it for most of the evening. Then he said, "I should have told you 5 years ago." I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought I was protecting Mom." I said, "I know. She thought she was protecting her brother. Margaret tried to protect Mom. You tried to protect Mom. Everyone in this story was protecting someone, and Richard was the only one actually paying attention to the money." Caleb laughed. Short and tired, but real. I sent Margaret a letter the week everything was finalized. I told her my mother had left her name for me to find. That the last thing she put in those documents was an apology she didn't know how to say out loud. That I was sorry it had taken 7 years and a death for anyone to listen. Margaret called me when she got the letter. She didn't say much. She said, "Your mother was a proud woman. Proud women find it very hard to say they were wrong. I knew that about her for 40 years. I just hoped she would find a way before the end." I said, "I think the photograph was her way." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, I think it was. Richard no longer manages anything connected to our family. He sent one message after the legal process began, not an apology, just a statement that he hoped we could eventually move past this for the sake of the family." I did not respond. Some things you move past. Some things you simply move forward from and leave exactly where they fell. My mother spent her last years trusting the wrong person and losing a friend who was trying to tell her the truth. She couldn't fix that while she was alive. So she did the only thing left available to her. She left a name on the back of a photograph and trusted me to find it. I found it, Mom. I found it.